My fiancé looked me straight in the eye and said, "I think loving you is holding me back financially and socially." I calmly ended the conversation, packed my things, and left. Months later, she saw my success story trending online while working double shifts to pay off debt her new boyfriend created. "I think loving you is actually holding me back financially and socially." She didn't even lower her voice when she said it. Didn't hesitate. Didn't look away. She just sat there on the kitchen counter, legs crossed, wine glass in hand, looking at me like she was reading a performance review she'd already decided the outcome of. I remember the silence that followed. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies where someone gasps or throws something. Just still. The refrigerator humming. A cab honking 6 floors below. The engagement ring sitting on the counter between us like it had been placed there on purpose. She didn't sound guilty when she said it. She sounded tired. Like she'd already rehearsed those words so many times inside her head that saying them out loud was just a formality. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her. And something in my chest, not my heart, something quieter than that, went completely flat. I didn't realize it then, but that conversation was going to completely change both of our lives. Just not in the way either of us expected. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We'd been together for 4 years. Engaged for 11 months. I was 29. She was 27. We shared a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent part of the city. Not luxury, not a dump. Just the kind of place 2 people rent when they're building towards something and telling themselves the square footage is temporary. I was working a mid-level analyst role at a logistics firm. Decent salary. Stable. Not impressive by the standards of the world she wanted to live in, but enough. She worked in marketing for a lifestyle brand. The kind of company that hosted rooftop parties and paid people to look like they were having the time of their lives on Instagram. And she was good at her job. More importantly, she loved the access that came with it. The events. The people. The room she got to walk into. I understood that about her early on. What I didn't understand, not fully, not until that night, was that she'd been quietly measuring me against those rooms for a long time and finding me short. It didn't start with that conversation. It never starts with one conversation. It starts with small things. 6 months before that night, we went to a rooftop event her company hosted in Midtown. Open bar. City views. The kind of crowd where everyone's business card felt like a statement. I wore a blazer I'd had for 3 years. Clean. Fitted. Nothing wrong with it. She looked at it when I walked out of the bedroom and pressed her lips together for just a second before she said, "That's what you're wearing." Not cruel. Just flat. "It's a nice blazer," I said. "It's fine," she said. That word. Fine. The way she said it made fine feel like an insult. I didn't make a big deal of it. I should have paid closer attention to what that moment actually was. At the party, she moved through the crowd the way she always did at those things. Effortlessly, quickly, like she had a mental map of who was worth talking to and exactly how long to spend with each person. I followed for a while. Then I noticed I'd stopped being introduced. Not aggressively excluded. Just overlooked. She'd turn to someone, light up, start a conversation, and I'd be standing slightly behind her with a drink in my hand and no real function. Once, a guy named Maxwell, finance, VP something, the kind of guy who makes his watch do the talking, shook her hand, and she laughed at something he said before she'd even fully turned back to check if I was still there. I was. She didn't introduce me for almost 4 minutes. When she finally did, she said my name and my job title and then immediately changed the subject. Maxwell barely looked at me. She barely noticed that he barely looked at me. I remember driving home that night thinking, she's embarrassed by me. Then I buried the thought. That was a mistake. The comments got more frequent after that. Not louder, more frequent. Connor just got promoted to director. He's 28. Connor was someone she worked with. She mentioned him the way people mention the weather. Casually, like the information was just floating in the air and had nothing to do with anything. But it always had something to do with something. Riley closed a series last month. Started his company 2 years ago. Riley was somebody's friend from a networking dinner. Devin's taking Alicia to Tulum for her birthday. They just got back from Portugal. Devin was Instagram. I never said anything. I just filed the names away. Listened to the frequency of them. Because that's what the comments were, not individual observations, but a frequency. A pattern she was building one comparison at a time. You are here. Other men are there. The distance between those 2 points is a problem I have to live with. 2 months before the night of that conversation, something happened that I haven't thought about in a long time. I'd been quietly developing something on the side. A proposal, really. More of an idea that had started to take actual shape. I'd been talking to a few people in the supply chain software space, identifying a gap in how mid-sized distributors managed vendor communication, and I'd spent about 8 months building out a rough framework. Nothing launched, nothing funded, just a detailed document, some market research, and 3 conversations with people who knew people. I told her about it one night over dinner. She listened, and then she said, "That sounds interesting. But you've been saying you're going to do something like that for a while now." Not wrong, but the way she said it made it feel less like an observation and more like a verdict. I didn't bring it up again. That was the second mistake. The night it ended was a Tuesday. No event. No argument that had been building all day. She just came home from work, poured a glass of wine, sat on the counter, and said it. "I think loving you is actually holding me back financially and socially." After the silence, I asked her one question. "Holding you back from what?" She looked at me like that was obvious. "From the life I want. From the people I should be around. From options." That last word landed heavier than the rest. Options. "You're saying I'm not an option worth keeping." "I'm saying," she started, slowly, like she was choosing words carefully, "that I've been patient. I've been supportive. And I feel like I've outgrown where we are." "Where we are," I repeated. "This apartment. This trajectory." She glanced around the room when she said it, like the walls themselves were evidence. I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Okay, just that." She blinked. I think she expected more. An argument. Pleading. Some version of me trying to close the distance she'd just announced. Instead, I walked to the bedroom, pulled the larger suitcase from the top shelf of the closet, started folding things. She appeared in the doorway about 2 minutes later. "What are you doing?" "Packing." I didn't say, "I'm not asking you to leave tonight." "I know." I kept folding. She stood there watching me, and I could feel something shifting in the room. She'd expected the conversation to go somewhere else. Toward negotiation. Toward me making a case. My silence, my calmness. I think it unsettled her in a way she hadn't prepared for. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked. I looked up. "You've already said everything." I took the ring off my finger, set it on the dresser, zipped the suitcase. She didn't stop me. I think part of her thought I would stop myself. I didn't. I stayed with my friend Marcus that first week. He had a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn, lived alone, and didn't ask many questions, which was exactly what I needed. The first 3 days I didn't do much. Sat with it. Felt the weight of 4 years ending in a 10-minute conversation. Felt something I'd later understand as relief, but at the time just felt like numbness. On the 4th day, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the document I'd stopped working on 2 months earlier. The one she'd looked at like a hobby I hadn't grown out of yet. I read through the whole thing. And for the first time in months, without anyone in the other room measuring me against people I'd never met, I could actually think. I want to be clear about something. The months that followed weren't a montage. There was no dramatic transformation. No sudden wealth. No overnight success. There was just work. Quiet, consistent, early morning, late night work. I refined the framework. I reached back out to the contacts I'd let go cold. One of them, a guy named James who ran operations for a regional wholesale group, had actually been thinking about the same problem from the other side. We started talking seriously. I moved into a smaller studio to reduce expenses. I cut everything I didn't need. I stopped going to events where I was supposed to perform a version of success I didn't have yet. I just worked. Meanwhile, I heard things. Not because I was looking, just because cities aren't as large as they feel. Mutual friends mentioned her name occasionally. She'd started seeing someone about 6 weeks after I left. His name was Brandon. Nobody I knew directly, but the description that filtered back was consistent. Good looking. Socially smooth. Worked in something adjacent to finance. Investments was the word used, though nobody seemed clear on the specifics. Drove a car that cost more than both our salaries combined. Took her to dinner at places we'd never been. I heard she posted about him constantly. Photos at restaurants, weekends away, the kind of social media presence that functions as an announcement. I upgraded. I didn't look. I made a decision early not to look. But people told me things they thought I'd want to know, or maybe things they wanted to tell. Courtney, a mutual friend, called me about 2 months in. "She seems really happy," she said, in the cautious tone people use when they're not sure if happy is a compliment or a wound. "Good," I said, and I meant it. Not generously, just factually. Her happiness wasn't something I needed to manage anymore. What I noticed over those same months was something changing in how I felt about myself. When you're inside a relationship where someone is quietly cataloging your shortcomings, where every dinner conversation has an undercurrent of not enough. You absorb it. You don't notice it happening. You just slowly start to see yourself through their measurements. Living alone, working on something I believed in, not having to defend my trajectory to anyone, I started recalibrating. Remembered things about myself I'd stopped referencing. The deal with James moved forward. We brought in a third person, a developer named Priya, who had built similar tools in a different industry. We filed paperwork in month 6. Had our first paying client by month 8. Small contract. Regional distributor in Ohio. But real. Money landing in a business account with my name on it for something I had built. That feeling doesn't have a clean description. It was quiet. Private. Nothing to post about. I remember sitting at my kitchen table at 11:30 on a Tuesday night looking at the confirmation email and thinking, she called this a maybe someday. I should tell you about Brandon. Because the version of him that existed in those early social media posts and the version of him that slowly revealed itself over the following months were not the same person. Nobody said anything directly for a while. That's how it works with those situations. People post the highlight reel while the behind the scenes deteriorates, and there's a delay, sometimes a long one, before the cracks become visible to anyone outside the relationship. The first sign I heard about came from Lindsay, another mutual friend, who ran into Jamie at a birthday thing and mentioned that Jamie seemed tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. The kind that comes from stress you're not talking about. Then Courtney mentioned, casually, that Jamie had picked up additional hours at work. She said she's just trying to save, Courtney said. I didn't ask follow-up questions, but I remembered the detail. By month 10, our company had 3 clients. Nothing viral. Nothing featuring in any magazines. Just 3 real contracts, real revenue, and a product that was solving an actual problem for actual businesses. James and I had started having conversations with a few people in the industry, not investors yet, just people who were paying attention. I moved out of the studio into a better apartment. Nothing dramatic, just more space. Bought a few things I delayed buying. Paid off the last of a credit card balance I'd been carrying for 2 years. Small moves, but they accumulated. I remember that period feeling like standing up straight for the first time after a long time hunched over something that didn't fit right. I went to an industry event in month 11. Not to be seen, not to perform, just because James thought we should show up and I agreed. And I walked into that room differently than I'd walked into the rooftop party in Midtown 18 months earlier. Same city, different version of who I was standing in it. I need to tell you what I found out about Brandon. Because it matters. Not for my story, for hers. Brandon's investments business, as it turned out, wasn't quite what it had presented itself as. He'd had a series of ventures over the past several years, each of which had involved other people's money and ended in ways that weren't fully explained. Nothing criminal, as far as anyone knew, but a pattern. Flashy entry, confident presentation, gradual disappearance of funds, exit before full accountability. The expensive car was leased. The dinners went on credit cards that weren't being fully paid. The lifestyle she'd been photographing for almost a year was largely constructed. I heard this from James, who had a contact who'd crossed paths with Brandon professionally and felt strongly enough about the experience to mention it unprompted. By the time this was filtering back to me, she was already 12 months into that relationship. 12 months of building a life on a surface that wasn't actually holding weight. I felt something when I heard it. Not satisfaction. Not quite. More like the particular sadness of recognizing a very specific kind of irony. She had left a man she called financially stagnant for a man who was financially fictional. Month 13. James forwarded me a link to an industry newsletter, a supply chain and logistics publication with a niche but genuinely influential readership. They'd done a piece on emerging B2B software tools disrupting mid-market distribution. We were in it. Not the headline, not the cover, but we were in it. A paragraph, our company name, a quote from our first client about operational efficiency. James texted, "We're real now." I sat with that for a long time. Then I called my mother and read her the paragraph. She didn't fully understand what it meant, but she understood that it mattered, and that was enough. 3 weeks after that article ran, I was at a networking dinner in a private room at a restaurant in the Flatiron District. Industry contacts. A few investors James knew. I was midway through a conversation about vendor API integration when I felt someone looking at me from across the room. I turned. It was Jamie. She was there with a woman I didn't recognize, a colleague, maybe. She looked good. She also looked tired in a way that a good outfit couldn't fully cover. The kind of tired that accumulates. Our eyes met for a second before either of us could manage an expression. She looked surprised. Not just to see me, but it's something about seeing me. I don't know exactly what she registered in that moment. Maybe the room I was standing in. Maybe the conversation I'd been having. Maybe just the way I was standing. Whatever it was, I watched something cross her face that she didn't intend to show. I nodded. She nodded back. I turned back to my conversation. That was it. No dramatic confrontation. No moment of declared victory. Just a nod across a room. But I felt her eyes on my back for the next few minutes, and I didn't turn around again. Qley told me the rest of it about 3 weeks later. She called on a Sunday evening, which meant it was something she'd been deciding whether to tell me and had finally landed on yes. Jamie and Brandon had ended things. Or more accurately, the situation had ended them. The debt was real. Credit cards in both their names that Brandon had convinced her to open for shared expenses that turned out to be his expenses. A loan she'd co-signed for a business venture that had dissolved without explanation. Double shifts at work to cover minimums. The apartment they'd moved into together, nicer than anything we'd ever had. Now something she was trying to figure out how to exit without taking the full financial hit alone. Qley's voice had that careful quality again, watching for how I'd respond. Is she okay? I asked. She's getting through it. Good. Silence. You're not going to say I told you so? Qley asked. I never said anything in the first place. The piece that got real traction ran about 4 months after that dinner. A larger publication, not mainstream press, but something respected in the startup and small business space, covered a roundtable on logistics tech. James and I had both been part of a panel. The article quoted me twice. It mentioned the company by name. It mentioned what we were building and why it mattered. Then someone shared it on LinkedIn, and someone else shared that. And by mid-afternoon, it had more engagement than anything in that space had gotten in months, because the problem we were solving resonated with a lot of people who had been quietly frustrated with it for a long time. My phone buzzed for most of the day. People I'd worked with years ago, colleagues from the logistics firm, 2 people I'd met once at events. I answered what I could, let the rest sit in the inbox. That night I sat in my apartment, the better apartment, the one I'd moved into without asking anyone's permission or measuring it against what anyone else had. And I felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not pride exactly. Something quieter. Like arriving somewhere you'd been walking toward for a long time and recognizing the place when you got there. I heard about the moment she saw it secondhand. Qley again. Jamie had been working a late shift. She'd taken on extra hours at a second job, the details of which I didn't ask for. She was on a break, phone in hand. Someone in her network had shared the article. She saw my name. She read it. Then apparently, she put her phone face down on the table and sat there for a while. Qley wasn't there. She heard this from someone else who was. I don't know what Jamie was thinking in that moment. I don't let myself speculate too much. But I think about the specific geometry of it sometimes. Her, exhausted, on a break from the work she was doing to fix the financial damage someone else had created. Me, on a LinkedIn article that was circulating through the exact industry circles she'd once told me I wasn't ambitious enough to reach. The ring on a dresser. The suitcase. The nod across a restaurant. The article. All of it connected in a line she could now trace backward. She texted me the following week. I almost didn't respond. Then I did, because not responding felt like a different kind of statement than I wanted to make. Saw the article. Really great. Looks like things are going well. I read it a few times. There was a lot in those 3 sentences. The flatness of really great. The vagueness of looks like things are going well. The absence of anything more specific. I thought about what to write back for a few minutes. Then I wrote, "Thanks. Hope you're doing okay." She responded, "Getting there." I didn't reply after that. Not because I was being cold. Because there was nothing else to say. We weren't a conversation that needed to continue. We were a conversation that had ended cleanly on a Tuesday night in a kitchen where she'd been honest in the most expensive way possible. Expensive for her, as it turned out. There's a version of this story where I end it by telling you what I've learned. I'm not going to do that. I don't think this story is about lessons. I think it's about how people sometimes make very clear decisions based on very specific values, and then have to live with the fullness of what those values actually produce. She valued status, appearance, association with a certain kind of success. She left someone she thought lacked those things. She chose someone she thought embodied them. And what she chose turned out to be a performance. What she left turned out to be a foundation. I don't say that with anger. I'm not angry at her. I haven't been for a long time. What she said to me that Tuesday night was painful, but it was also honest. It was the most useful honesty I ever received from her. Because it returned me to myself at exactly the right time. Without the weight of her measurements, I built something real. Without the constant background noise of her comparisons, I could finally hear my own thinking. Without the relationship, I found out what I was actually made of. She called loving me a financial and social liability. By the time that article ran, she was working double shifts to pay off debt that someone else's performance had created. I wasn't celebrating that. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't glad it was hard for her, but I noticed it. The particular irony of it. The way choices have a precision to them that we don't always see in the moment. The last time I saw her in person was about 2 months after the article. A shared friend's birthday at a bar in the West Village. She was there when I arrived. We ended up near each other at the bar around 10 o'clock. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She looked better than the last time I'd seen her. Less tired around the eyes. Some of the stress had lifted. "Things really seem good," she said. "I've been following along a little." "It's been a good stretch," I said. She nodded. There was a pause that could have gone several directions. She seemed to be measuring something. Then she said, quietly, "I think I was wrong. About some things." I looked at her. She meant it. I could see she meant it. I said, "I know." Not cruelly. Not as a victory. Just as acknowledgement. She nodded slowly. Looked down at her drink. "Are you happy?" she asked. I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "I actually am." She smiled. Small. A little sad. "Good," she said. And she meant that too. We talked for a few minutes about nothing specific. Mutual friends, the neighborhood, the kind of surface conversation that fills the space where something deeper used to live. Then I excused myself, said it was good to see her, and meant a version of that. I didn't look back when I walked away. Not dramatically. I just didn't need to. Some people leave right before everything changes. She left exactly on time. For both of us. The life I built after her wasn't built in spite of her. It was built in the absence of her. And that absence, as it turned out, was the exact space I needed. I think about her sometimes. Not with longing. Not with bitterness. Just with the particular clarity that comes from distance. She was someone who taught me what I didn't want to spend my life proving. And the moment she said what she said, standing in that kitchen with a wine glass and a decision she'd already made, she gave me back the only thing I actually needed. Myself. Without the weight of someone else's expectations telling me what that was worth. The ring sat on that dresser for 3 days before she moved it. I never asked where it went. I didn't need to know. Some things end exactly the way they should. Quietly. Completely. Without ceremony. And then you go build what you were always going to build. Alone for a while. And then, when the time is right, with people who were never keeping score.